The day Barış Arduç and Elçin Sangu met again began like any ordinary day. Neither of them knew that a simple reunion would bring back so many memories. They had both changed since the last time they had spent a significant amount of time together. Their careers had continued to grow, their lives had become busier, and they had experienced countless new moments away from the cameras. Yet some memories never truly disappear. They simply wait quietly until something brings them back. That morning, Barış arrived at the location earlier than expected. He walked inside, greeted a few familiar faces, and looked around the room. There was something strangely familiar about the place. He had been there many times before, but today it felt different. Perhaps it was because he knew Elçin would soon arrive. He had not seen her properly for quite some time. Of course, they had both continued with their lives. There had been occasional messages, brief conversations, and moments when their paths almost crossed. But this was different. This would be the first time they would actually sit together again after so much time apart. Barış placed his script on the table and looked through the pages. He tried to focus. But memories kept appearing. He remembered their long conversations between scenes. He remembered the laughter that could suddenly fill an otherwise quiet room. He remembered how easily they could understand each other's expressions. Most of all, he remembered how natural everything had once felt. Then he heard a familiar voice from the hallway. He looked up. Elçin had arrived. For a moment, neither of them moved. Their eyes met from across the room. Elçin smiled first. Barış returned the smile. It was a simple moment, but both could feel the weight of everything that had happened since they had last stood face to face. Elçin walked toward him. Hi. Hi. They laughed softly. It was almost funny how difficult the first few seconds felt. They had known each other for so long, yet after so much time apart, even a simple greeting carried emotion. Elçin looked at him carefully. You haven't changed. Barış smiled. Neither have you. She laughed. That's not completely true. Maybe not. They stood there for another moment. Then Elçin asked, How have you been? Good. Busy. Same. There was another pause. Then Barış smiled. I think we're both better at saying busy than explaining everything. Neither seemed in a hurry to leave. Finally, she asked, Are you going? In a minute. Same. They smiled. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Elçin said, It was good seeing you again. Barış nodded. It was. She smiled. I mean it. So do I. Another quiet moment passed. Then Barış said, We shouldn't wait this long again. Elçin looked at him. I agree. It was not a promise about the future. It was simply a sincere decision to stay connected. Before leaving, they exchanged one final smile. The day had started with uncertainty. It ended with something much warmer. They had met again. And in that meeting, they had discovered that time had changed many things, but it had not erased the connection they shared. Neither knew what would happen next. But both walked away from that day carrying the same thought. Sometimes, when two people meet again after a long time, they don't return to the past. They simply discover that the best parts of that past are still alive in the present. The following morning felt different. Barış arrived at the location with a strange sense of anticipation. He had not expected their reunion to affect him so deeply, but the previous day's conversations kept returning to his thoughts. He remembered Elçin's smile when she first saw him. He remembered the way they had immediately started laughing about old memories. Most importantly, he remembered her words. Maybe some friendships don't really have an ending. They just have pauses. The sentence stayed with him. When Elçin arrived later that morning, she noticed Barış almost immediately. Their eyes met. This time, there was no awkwardness. They both smiled naturally. "Good morning," Elçin said. "Good morning." She placed her things down and looked at him. "Did you sleep well?" "Eventually." "Eventually?" "I was thinking about yesterday." Elçin smiled. "So was I." There was something reassuring about knowing they had both been thinking about the same moment. They began preparing for the day's work. The schedule was busy, but their conversations continued whenever they had a few free minutes. At one point, they found themselves sitting outside while the crew prepared the next scene. The morning was quiet. Elçin looked toward the distance. "You know what I realized yesterday?" "What?" "We spent so much time together before, but we never really talked about how quickly everything could change." Barış nodded. "Life doesn't usually ask permission before changing." She smiled. "That's true." He looked at her. "But maybe that's why meeting again matters." Elçin turned toward him. "Why?" "Because it reminds you which parts of your life were genuinely important." She remained quiet for a moment. His words had touched something inside her. Their reunion had not brought back the past exactly as it had been. It had brought back the feeling of being understood. That was different. And perhaps even more valuable. As filming continued, their professional connection became stronger with every scene. They knew when to pause. They knew when to let a moment breathe. They could communicate with the smallest expression. After one particularly emotional rehearsal, the director asked them to take a short break. Elçin walked outside. Barış followed a few minutes later. She was standing quietly near the entrance. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes." She smiled. "Just needed some air." Barış nodded. They stood together without speaking. There was no pressure to fill the silence. After a while, Elçin said, "Do you ever think about how people remember certain moments differently?" "All the time. I remember some days so clearly." "Which ones?" She smiled. "The simple ones." Barış looked at her. "Not the big moments?" "No. Sometimes the big moments are easy to remember. But the ordinary days." She paused. "They stay with you for different reasons." Barış nodded slowly. "I understand." She continued. "Like sitting somewhere after filming. Talking about nothing. Laughing for no reason." Barış smiled. "I remember those." "So do I." The conversation became quieter. Neither needed to say more. They both understood what those memories meant. Later that afternoon, something unexpected happened. A member of the crew brought an old photograph from a previous project. It showed several people standing together, including Barış and Elçin. Elçin looked at it and immediately laughed. "I remember this day." Barış took the photograph. "You looked completely different." "So did you." They both laughed. The photograph became a small reminder of how much time had passed. They studied it carefully. There were familiar faces. Familiar places. Familiar smiles. But they were younger. Life had been different. Their dreams had been different. Their responsibilities had been different. Yet looking at the photograph, they realized something. The people in that picture had been genuinely happy. And that happiness had not disappeared. It had simply become a memory. Elçin looked at Barış. "Do you miss those days?" "Sometimes." "Me too." "Would you go back?" She thought for a moment. "No." Barış smiled. "Why not?" "Because I like where life brought me." He nodded. That's a good answer. She looked at the photograph again. Maybe we don't need to go backward to appreciate what happened. Barış smiled. We can carry it forward. Those words became important. Their reunion was no longer about recreating the past. It was about understanding what the past had taught them. They had both grown. They had both changed. And somehow, that made their renewed friendship even more meaningful. As the evening approached, their schedules finally became lighter. They decided to sit together for a few minutes before leaving. Elçin looked at Barış. Can I ask you something? Of course. Did you ever think we'd meet again like this? Barış smiled. Honestly? Honestly. No. She laughed softly. Me neither. He continued. But I'm glad we did. Elçin looked at him for a moment. So am I. There was no dramatic declaration. No attempt to define what their connection meant. They simply acknowledged that the reunion mattered. Sometimes honesty does not need many words. The silence that followed felt peaceful. Then